Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to the second episode of The Breakdown. Now thank you so much for the support on the first episode of this show as well as all the other shows that came out last week. It was great to see people viewing, liking, commenting, as well as just messaging me, telling me that they liked the videos. I hope you will continue to enjoy the content that I produce over the coming weeks and months. Now last time we took a look at a film that I worked on last year and how I kind of developed or worked on the look of the film. Today I wanted to go back to what I originally intended the show to be about, which is taking a piece of art and kind of dissecting it a little bit, trying to see what we can learn from it. So a couple days ago I was on ArtStation looking for a piece of art that I could talk about, and I found this really cool car model that someone did, and I thought when I looked at it that there were a lot of things that we could talk about for video. So the piece of art is created by this person right here. I'm not going to try to attempt to pronounce the name because I'm too scared of butchering it completely. As always, the link for the piece of art will be in the description so you can go check out the piece of art and support the artist yourself. And one quick reminder before we get into it, I'm going to try to not critique the person's art, but rather use things that I notice in the piece of art as a jumping off point for conversation and discussion. So without any more rambling or anything like that, let's just jump straight into the breakdown. Alright, it's time to dive into this piece of art. Now before we look at the piece of art and actually dissect it, this person was very kind to include a very descriptive explanation of what the piece of art was and include some details of how they went about and created this piece of art, what kind of softwares they used, and especially because in terms of modeling they included like poly counts and things like that. So before I start looking at the piece of art, I want to read that description for you so that you can have a better understanding of what we're talking about. The name of the piece of art is called Generic Formula Race Car Low Poly 3D Model. Now this is a low poly subdivision ready 3D model of a generic Formula race car with PBR material. The model has unique design and not connected with any particular racing series, team, cars, brands, and third-party IP owners. Suitable for computer/mobile games, broadcast advertising, visualization. Perfect choice for your racing game. Model created in 3ds Max 2018 and rendered with V-Ray 4.10. Lighting is a mix of global illumination from HDRI included and one V-Ray light. The model does not require installation of additional plugins or software. Now this is the interesting part when it comes to modeling. Poly count 30,303, no n-gons. If you subdivide it twice, you're looking at nearly 1 million polygons. So that's what the description reads, so it kind of gives us a better understanding of what this model is. Here we have the model. They included a bunch of views, so we have a front view, we have a nice back view, and then we have the same views but with the nice wireframe view. We have both of views like that, and then we also have a more in-action shot, which is really nice, and you can see they included the same thing here, and then they did a really cool job and included a nice view of a close-up of the car so we can see some of the textural details, which is really nice. So I want to break this conversation up into 3 parts. I want to first focus on the modeling aspect, and then I want to focus on shading and lighting. So we're going to talk about all 3 of those things. Modeling wise, this looks like a really solid model. I don't really have any major complaints. One thing that's really nice is they mentioned there's no n-gons. So to explain n-gons, I'm going to have to kind of dive into some kind of modeling basics. For those of you who aren't familiar with modeling or 3D or anything like that, a model is a bunch of points that are just in space that create a shape, and the computer knows that those points are related to one another and creates a shape. When you're trying to create a surface with those points, there's 2 ways to go about it. You can use quads, which are, basically rectangles that connect 4 points. This is the most commonly used one, especially when you're doing films or things like that. You're gonna use quads. And then you also have tris, which is triangles pretty much. It's just 3 points connected to one another. This is more commonly used for video games or things where you want less data, so it's a little bit less heavy if you're trying to have a lot of objects and assets in one scene. Now in this case, this person used quads and they said no n-gons. So basically an n-gon is just a quad or a tri that has more than 4 edges. So if it has more than 4 edges, it's going to create this weird looking shape. I'll try to find an example of an N-gon I can show on screen right now. It's going to give you weird deformations, and generally it's something you want to avoid. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at this person's wireframe to look at how they distribute the polygons. Now, the first thing that stands out to me, having modeled a lot of cars myself, is how clean the topology of the car is, especially around the wheel area. Now, something that's very common when you're making something that has a lot of detail like this, especially around the wheel, it's easy to add too many edges to something. Edges allow you to really have crisp details, and it's really easy for someone to just go in and try to add a lot of edges. Problem is, especially when you're looking at a model very far away, edges will look like very, very dark spots. You can see, especially around the wheel area, this area, as well as around the rear wing, this area is very, very dark, which means there's probably a lot of edges in that area to try to give it the shape. In reality, that's something I've been told to try to avoid as much as possible by both recruiters and professors that I've talked to. It's something that I sometimes struggle with as well if you look at some of my models. So this person, they don't have any N-gons on here, but they do have a couple of tries. Notably, I see 2 here on the rear wing. Not really see anywhere else where they have tries, which is cool, and I think it's really great that they were able, if these are the only 2 tries they have for the entire model and the rest is all quads, I mean, that works. It's a good solution. It doesn't take away from the shape, it doesn't look weird, so I think that's perfectly fine. The one thing I do notice about deformation and about the kind of distribution of the polygons is this area right here. The kind of side pod area for me seems a little bit odd. Typically, when you're creating edges, you want these edges to be as smooth and as straight as possible. You don't want too many jagged edges because that's going to affect your deformation, and especially if you're going to rig a model, it's going to also not help you down the line with like skin weights and things like that. This is the only area where I'm kind of confused. I can see that there's a slight bump here, which is intentional, but if you look at it, this edge here kind of swoops down a little bit and comes back up, and you kind of have what you call uneven quads, and you kind of see it down here too. You have like these quads here are all pretty even, and then here you kind of have a big quad, a small quad, a slightly bigger quad, and then a really big quad. Something that I've been taught is that you want to try to avoid these kind of shapes. You would want to try to maybe have your edge come down a little bit down here, and trying to have this edge kind of come down this way, and then that way this edge would be a bit straighter, and then here you would try to straighten out this edge as well as this one to just have more even quads and more of a smooth edge going across the side pod, which is going to help with your deformation. This could also be just because it's not smoothed, and that's completely possible. You can see that it's not smooth because there's the faceting here of the side pod, but when you look at it in this view, you don't really see the faceting. So realistically, it looks fine, but this is just a minor detail that is something that I've been told to watch out for. Other than that, this model is really well done. There's not really anything I can say about it other than it looks great. It's very clean. Now, moving on from the modeling, I mentioned I wanted to talk about surfacing, and we're going to talk about that for a second here. This is the close-up of the car that we can see, and I wanted to take a look at some of the surface details that the person put in. The first thing I'm noticing is that they included a lot of nice details and imperfections in the tires. You can see that the tires aren't perfectly done. It's really nice texture. The thing I'm also noticing is they did a really good job with the textural detail on the kind of carbon fiber bits. You have this area right here, the floor area, you have also the little like antenna and little like winglets here, and even the fin area back there also has a nice kind of detail. The rest of the car to me seems like it just has a material that doesn't have too many imperfection details. If you look at an actual race car, it's not going to have a lot of dirt and a lot of scratches and things like that because it's still brand new, and they do clean the cars quite often before and after every session. So the cars are very clean because realistically, when you have a car that's this perfect in terms of aerodynamic performance, they're gonna want to avoid having any sort of dirt or scratches because that can impact performance. When you're looking at the car, especially from a view like this, you're not gonna see too many imperfections and, you know, micro details. There could be some textural details that we just can't see, but even in this close-up, I think it looks fine in my opinion, especially if it's for a mobile game. You're not really gonna have the quality to notice these things. So I think it's also important to not overdo it. Moving away from textures, let's talk about the lighting for a little bit. This person mentioned mentioned that they used V-Ray, which I've personally never really used V-Ray. I've used Arnold a lot, and the two aren't exactly the same, but they're not completely different either. One thing that they mentioned straight away that I think is really great is they use an HDRI lighting setup. Now, for those of you who don't know what an HDRI is, it's basically a 360 image that you use to provide ambient light. It shouldn't be your primary source of light, but it does provide some nice realistic lighting, and it's really great, especially if you want things to look as real as possible. Now, they also mentioned they used one light, and that's it for this setup, which I find really interesting, just because I feel like one light in general is very little, especially if you're trying to make this look realistic. Now, I don't know if this was their intention to make it look as realistic as possible. The thing I will say straight up is it looks like they're using some kind of flat plane or something like that. You can see this is an image. It's sort of blurry, which I don't know if it would be because they did like a depth of field treatment on it. It kind of looks like maybe just a plane with an image and not an actual environment. I could be wrong. It could very much be an environment that they just placed the car in. The one thing I will say is that with the lighting, I feel like this is really, really bright for a highlight. I feel like a highlight, especially if you look at the rest of the environment in the background, the light isn't that strong. So I feel like this is super strong for a highlight. I feel like it should be a bit softer, maybe a bit less intense. The light's coming down from this way, but you'd probably want a bit of a rim light to just break apart the car. There's a lot of light coming from here, but not much coming from here. And I think the sun here doesn't seem like it's coming at an angle. It kind of seems like it's at the top. So I feel like the light shouldn't be as one-sided as it is here. That's just something that I would look at in terms of lighting. I think it's super important to keep in mind when you're trying to make something look as realistic as possible, and when you're trying to add something to a scene, that you really pay attention to where the shadows are in the scene. So here, there's not really very intense shadows. You can see, especially here, there's a little gap. So if the light was coming down from that way, you'd probably see a little bit of a shadow. This would provide some shadow. This has a very, very, very distinctive shadow coming from here. I feel like the shadow should be more central and a little bit softer because it is super, super heavy for the light. I suspect that this person maybe had the HDRI a little bit too high, and also the intensity of their one light was a bit too much. So I think that's definitely something I would keep in mind, is pay attention to the intensity of your HDRI if you're adding an HDRI, and also pay attention to the intensity of your key light, just so that it's not too crazy, because I think in this case, I do think it looks a little bit too blown out. I will say, I do think you want some highlights in this case because the sun is very bright and you will want some highlights, especially on a very reflective surface like this. But I do think that the highlights do seem a little bit too intense for this. So to recap, what did we learn? So we learned the importance of really clean topology and making sure that your edges are very smooth and that you keep your quads at equal shapes, just to have the best looking topology, especially when you're showcasing a wireframe view. We also learned the importance of kind of managing the amount of textural detail you have. Having some textural detail is important, but it's important not to go too crazy because you have to keep in mind what you're making the piece of art for yourself. In this case, if we were making a car for a film, we'd probably want to add a little bit more textural detail because the renders are going to be much higher quality. But this being for a mobile game, you're probably not going to see the textural detail that much. So you can get away with less textural detail than you would normally. Finally, we learned the importance of looking at the images you're using as reference and trying to make sure you match the lighting as best as possible. Once again, if you want to go check out the piece for yourself, link will be in the description. Go support the artist, really great artist. They have a lot of other really great models that I saw on their profile. Go give them a follow, go give this piece a like. So there we go, that was the second episode of The Breakdown. I hope you enjoyed this little technical breakdown of this piece of art. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you leave a like. Let me know in the comments what you thought. If you have any sort of things, any questions, whatever, please leave them down below. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'm trying to grow the channel, so I would appreciate if you subscribe if you enjoy the content. If you have any suggestions for pieces of art that we can take a look at for a future episode, please leave them in the comments, or you can DM me or whatever. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video. Peace.